Hello and welcome to another episode of the Happy Sad podcast. In this episode, you're joined by me, Blake, and Ella, and we've decided to do a format that we think will be a little bit more fun for us and hopefully for the listener, in terms of just two of us pairing off and basically kind of just having a conversation and giving us both a chance to get to know each other a little bit better. And I suppose it opens the door for listeners to hear a little bit more about us and kind of our experiences, because obviously they merge into, I guess, the bones of what the Happy Sad Club is. So yeah, thanks for joining me, Ella. How are you feeling?
Hello. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Yeah.
Do
For a
we need
Wednesday
to get
morning.
to know each other better if we've known each other for 20 years?
Yeah, I suppose that does raise a good point. There's been a few gaps in the chain, but yeah, I'd say we know each other pretty well. I definitely think I know you the best out of the little group of us, obviously, because of our life experiences, and we share a lot of friends and things like that. So,
yeah.
But it's still nice. I think it's still nice to get the floor to be able to like really hear about what you've been up to, what you've been through, you know, what you've got coming up, things like that. So,
Yeah.
Should I start with you?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Well, I think a nice place to start is with the fact that you were the first person that shared on the page. You and Raffin both sent me videos at the same time, but I wanted to share you first for a few reasons. Firstly, because I thought what you did was amazing. I thought what Raffin did was also absolutely amazing. But because it was my thing, I wanted to show that it wasn't just like a Rivers thing. And just how receptive you were to the concept, and how I basically gave you nothing to go off. You know, I didn't really know what the Happy Sad Club even was. It was an idea. And I think you sharing your video cemented for me from the very first moment what this could be. So that was very special. So I want to thank you for that to start off with.
Thank you.
But yeah, why did you share? Why did you want to be involved, and what got you to that point?
I have not always, but more recently been just so much more open with my mental health. I think there's so much power in sharing, and being mentally ill can be very lonely. So, and the way you sold the Happy Sad Club to me about this space where people can share and like interact and relate, I just thought that was such a good idea, and it would be selfishly cathartic to talk about my experience, but also I know that other people have gone through very similar things, and I knew that people would probably get in touch with me and say, I know exactly what you're going through. And that did happen. And since that is still happening, people are still getting in touch with me and saying, I really admire what you guys are doing. And it just felt natural. There was no question in my mind whether I wanted to share, and especially knowing you and having grown up with you, I trust you to, to share things that are sensitive in a way that feels good and feels right, and that people can interact with in a good way. So yeah, I just kind of, there was no question really.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, and I think you clearly because obviously up until that point we probably hadn't had as much contact, and then our contact has accelerated from there, which is amazing. But I guess it was nice to see where you were at, because obviously you've been through a lot. And you touch on that in the video. And if you are new to the Happy Sad Club at this point, I'd recommend you scroll all the way down on our Instagram and take a watch. But I think it'd be nice, given the fact that we are now in a long format podcast, to like, if you could just run through a little bit more about, you know, maybe like the chronology of your experience.
Yeah.
You know, take as much time as you need, and you know, because I'd like to know as well.
Yeah. So I was always a very sensitive child. Like, I wanted my shoes to be put on by a certain person, or I would like have a tantrum if I couldn't walk near the wall, or I was just very sensitive. All my emotions were heightened, and that kind of turned into anxiety. There was no, for me, and this is something that I've explored in therapy, which I have been in and out of for 10 years. Like, I've had, I think, 8 therapists at this point. Something that we explored was there a trigger? And we couldn't really find one. But I remember I was that child that didn't want to sleep over at anyone's house. Like if I went for a sleepover, I was calling my mum in the middle of the night and be like, "Mum, pick me up. I don't want to be here anymore." Um, and then I would be able to go home. So there was always like a level of anxiety. But when I was in secondary school, there was a couple of days where I was off sick. And I remember this so clearly that the day I was supposed to go back, I just had this intense feeling of like, I can't go. I can't go back to school. I don't want to go back to school. And of course, then that raises like, are you being bullied? Like, is there something going on at school? Nothing. I loved school. I loved learning. Like, I was a proper nerd. I loved school. So it was really just like, I don't know what's happened here. And then my attendance had always been 100% and it dropped to like 84% or something. And there was like queries whether I could go to prom and things like that. And then I went into sixth form, and the first year was at the school that we had always been at. So we had our lovely history teacher, Miss Wallace, who was our form tutor as well. She was kind of my point of contact. She knew what was happening, that I was having this anxiety, and she would just be like, email me in the morning. If you can't come in, I'll send you like whatever work needs doing. So that was really helpful. But then at the end of the first year, the schools merged and we were going to have to go to the other school in our town. And I just thought, if I'm already struggling to attend the school that I'm at now, that I've been at since I was 12, how the hell am I going to go to the other school and meet all these new people? And I actually ended up dropping out, or being asked to drop out, because they just said there's no way we can do anything for you. And I think that's when my parents were like, right, you need therapy, like we need to do something about this. So that was kind of my first experience of therapy. And it was very much I don't know if I just got like given a dud, but it was very much like, how did your parents treat you when you were a child? And I'm like, I won the parents lottery, for real. Like, my parents are amazing. So it's not that. I think they're just trying to like find a trigger. But yeah, long story short, that went on like in and out of therapy for years and years. Like, couldn't work, couldn't socialize. All my friends are having to like come to my house instead of me going out. And I think there were like a few notable therapy sessions with certain counsellors that kind of clicked for me, where I was then able to go out more. And I've been better than I am now. I've been worse than I am now. But I think there is always a level of anxiety with me. There, even just existing is, there's an anxious level. I know I've spoken about it before, but the part of your brain that detects danger, mine has been called a faulty car alarm. So even if you're like not near me, or there's no perceived danger, mine is going off and telling me you're in danger, which then like leads to the bodily responses and makes you even more anxious. So kind of, I'm just existing on a plane of anxiety and just like desperately trying not to let anyone know that I'm like struggling. But yeah, I'm an optimistic person. I think I love my life despite everything that's going on in my brain. Everything externally is wonderful and lovely, and I enjoy life. But yeah, there's just like a level of horrible anxiety underneath.
Yeah, there's so many things there that are so interesting, like whether it be, being a sensitive child, or, that underlying level of anxiety. I can resonate with that a little bit. Yeah, I always remember how brilliant you were at school, especially in like the Englishes, always being like waiting to see what you had to say. Because I wasn't exactly a great student. I wasn't a naughty kid, but I definitely didn't love learning as much as I do now. But no, I have fairly vivid memories of the transition of you away from school, like, because I know we shared quite a lot of lessons, didn't we? So because you did psychology as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember, it was a little bit more noticeable when you weren't there, given the cohort we had. But no, I think it's hard, isn't it, to know how to manage those experiences. And I don't think, despite how brilliant our teachers were, I don't think a lot of places know how to manage those experiences for students. I assume it's getting better because it feels like everything is getting slightly better. But it's a really powerful thing to be able to have had so many big events and to still have the attitudes you have. And I think that's what's so nice is that, you know, there's a slight assumption here, but I feel like a lot of people, when they start to experience these things, they become overwhelmed with their incapacity, rather than focusing on the capacity they do have, rather than kind of meeting themselves where they're at and being content with what is available. And I think that's what's always been so nice about your attitude. And maybe it comes with the experience of being, experiencing what you have for so long, you've just familiarized yourself so much with it. But your attitude through it is just so refreshing. And I think it creates like a level of hope for people. And I suppose that's why you have imprinted a lot of people more than you maybe realize. It's not because, you've overcome these huge events in like a literal or like a physical sense. You've overcome it in like a very emotional sense. And I think that is like a very significant thing. So it's pretty cool.
I mean, don't get me wrong, there are, and India can attest to this, our mutual friend, there are moments where I'm like absolutely done, like I don't want to do it anymore, everything's just so difficult and I hate my life and it's so unfair, and but then you kind of, if I get stuck there, there's no coming out of it. Like
No.
I would be, and like you said, it's been happening for 10 years. I think if I was miserable all the time, I'm just doing myself a disservice. Like, there's so much to be grateful for. And it hasn't always been that way because I was diagnosed with depression alongside the anxiety. And I'm on antidepressants, which, help me get out of bed and shower and eat and, be present. So it hasn't always been that way that I've been positive about my journey, and there are definitely frequent moments where I'm like having an existential crisis of like, oh, this is my life, like, oh god, like everyone else is doing these things and I'm doing this. But I think, I've created a life for myself that lends itself to my anxiety, and we are trying to work alongside each other. We in a therapy session we named my anxiety Bertha, because it's quite helpful to like separate yourself and like, so me and Bertha are trying to respect each other. We're just trying to live together. So yeah, I think it's being able to have a good attitude about it for the most part is is what's getting me by.
Yeah, I think that's huge. At what point did you go on antidepressants? Just, I'm curious because I've also experienced using them.
Yeah, so it was my first counsellor that said, I think you might be depressed. And I was like, doesn't sound like me. Weird. But then I went to the doctors and they were like, yeah, we're going to have to do something about this. So I think I was probably about 17 or 18 that I got put on antidepressants. How old were you?
I should know more about my history. I want to say 21.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was very resistant to it. I got given the medication. I didn't touch it for like a year.
Really?
Despite feeling miserable.
What was your like hesitation?
Listen, I don't like taking paracetamol.
Okay.
I probably just a stubbornness. I think for me, the action of taking an antidepressant like solidified the fact that there's something wrong, that I have an issue that needs to be fixed via a remedy, and I couldn't come to terms with that. Like my journey into being clinically depressed was very typical of what you would probably expect of like a young man, which it sounds a terrible thing to say, but that's just, I suppose, the state of the environment at the moment that we live in, is that like people don't want to get help because they don't want to then, if they have to be helped, that implies something's wrong. And that was very much my issue, was that I just didn't want to admit that something was wrong, despite feeling pretty terrible all the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did that start after school then? Because I don't ever remember, or maybe you just hid it really well, but I don't ever remember like there being instances where I was like, oh, I'm a bit worried about Blake.
Yes, similar to you. Like, I, growing up, was always very sensitive, very shy. I was also paralleling that with this weird like abilities to be confident. Like there were some things I was very confident. I've always been quite confident in who I am, but I've always had to kind of push through a lot to get to that point. It just doesn't look like that to people. But I've always been a little bit more sensitive or receptive to other people's feelings. Like if other people were upset, it would really make me upset. I wasn't very good at managing emotions that way. And then I kind of was fine. I felt really good in school. I would never have understood what it felt like to be unhappy or depressed or any of those things. And then it was actually when I turned 18, so when we graduated from sixth form, if you call it that, that's when I started to really get hit. There was a few big things that happened in my life that kind of, I guess you could call them traumas now, but they were more traumas at like an emotional level as opposed to like a physical. And yeah, I think there was just a huge transition. I've always been, again, this is what I've been told by parents, grandparents, things like that, quite like a deep person. Like I will think about things. I've never slept well because I couldn't switch off. I've always kind of had things on my mind. Very like overactive thinker, if such a thing exists. And yeah, I think I laid a very strong foundation for someone that could be very anxious and depressed. And I think that when I look back, honestly, that's always been there. So I guess when you talked about your experience, it kind of made sense to me that it's no shock that I struggle with these things, in my opinion. But yeah, I'd say from 18, it was a few things happened, but I didn't handle it very well for 2 years. I didn't know that anything was going wrong. I was just doing a lot of silly things, avoiding stuff. And then I joined university when I was 21. At the end of 2021, when I got to the end of my first year, I had like a proper breakdown. Like I just crumbled. And going into summer and having 3 months of alone time where I was just doing a bit of work in a cafe, I like crumbled. And then I had a terrible year, and I didn't take antidepressants for the whole year, even though I had them. And then I started taking them the following year, and yeah, I was on them for about two and a half years, 3 years, and then I just got to a point where, again, stubbornness prevailed, and I was like, I want to try and see if I can manage these experiences without that. And it took me a few tries, but I'm at a point now where, touch wood, I haven't had to use them. I still don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I probably would feel great if I was on them, but I think I've got myself to a point where I'm doing all right without them. So yeah.
I think we represent like the two camps of depression. Of like, I was like, yeah, get me on the pills, get me all of them. I was like, yeah, load me up. And like I've been on them consistently since I was like 17, and if I have to take them for the rest of my life, I'm not worried about that. Like if they're helping, they're helping. I'm not worried. But yeah, I think a lot of people are also where you are, where you don't want to be on them. You don't want to rely on them, if that's the word. Like you just want to be able to feel what you're feeling. And I think both camps are valid as long as you're like safe doing
100%.
so.
Listen, I'm obviously obsessed with research and science, and I think there's a very high efficacy to these things. I think the thing I always struggled with, even though in hindsight I think it's very good, is that based on like the health structure we're in, it is a lot simpler for them to just medicate you. However, I think for a lot of people to get to a state where they feel a bit more level and then to begin to educate themselves on their own experiences, it's probably actually a really good idea, because you can step away from those kind of physical responses short term. And that's exactly what I did. I think I leveraged the antidepressants in a way where it allowed me to be in a more stable emotional and physical environment. And then I began to learn. And similar to you, I've had a lot of therapy. I still have therapy. I will never not have therapy. I only have a session once every month now at the moment, just because life's a bit chaotic. But it's good. It keeps me accountable. I've got a very good relationship with my therapist. But yeah, I got to a point where also I don't know. I read a lot of philosophy, and I feel like I was just inspired to just be really uncomfortable again. I'd like convinced myself that I'd rather be myself but unhappy than this overly happy version of myself. And I felt like the antidepressants affected me so much in a positive way. I felt like a caricature of myself. And I was like, I just need to find out. And then it was okay. But I can hold my hands up and say, had that experience have not gone well for me, I would be on them right now. There's no question. I have no, having had them, I am a bigger advocate of them than having not had them, if that makes sense. So just
Yeah.
because I don't take them doesn't mean I'm suggesting to people that they should try to stop if they, for whatever reason. I'm just very curious about how miserable I can be.
Yeah. I think, that, again, that's where we differ, because my whole thing is like, I don't ever want to feel uncomfortable. Like, a lot of my anxiety comes from a fear of embarrassment, funnily enough, which again I found out during therapy. Weird, didn't know that. Which always makes people laugh, because I was a theatre kid. Like, I loved performing, loved drama. Like, get me up on a stage and I'll sing to like a million people, fine. But it's the very intimate embarrassments of like, which is where the emetophobia comes in. And I know we were just speaking about this before, but so emetophobia is a fear of sick, basically. It can be a fear of other people being sick or a fear of yourself being sick, both. Mine started off as both, and again, we don't know where it came from. I can't remember the exact trigger, but the thing about it is, I'm with a lot of therapy so much better than it was, because I couldn't even say the words. Like, I could not speak about being sick, couldn't watch people being sick on the telly, even knowing it was fake. Like, nothing. Could not. If someone was gagging around me, I'm running. Like, done. It was proper panic stations, but it's so much better now. Like, I can speak about it freely. I don't have as much like panic, but it still is like the top of my mental health, my long scroll of mental illnesses. It's like the one that affects me the most, because it's kind of like the umbrella that started everything else. Like, all the anxiety comes from the emetophobia, and like the obsessive compulsive tendencies come from the emetophobia, and same as like the agoraphobia and all of that. It all comes from this one seed. So I forgot where I was going with that.
I had no idea that so much of it spiraled from that. I always thought that was just like a little, a little side dish to the dinner. I never realised that was the main course.
Yeah,
So
it's
how did you get to a point where you can manage that? Because that's not something I know people that have it.
mhm.
But whenever they talk about it, it doesn't feel so. It's like, oh no, I can't do sick. That's like their thing. It's like, I can't do sick. I can't be sick. But they don't really. They might not even know what it's called. But that must be a very consuming thing to have gone through.
It is, and I always explain it to people in this way. Like, say you had a deathly fear of snakes, like panic, sweats, can't, I know you're laughing because you are a snake lover.
Blake the snake.
Say you had like a fear of snakes, like absolutely debilitating. For the rest of your life, you could probably avoid snakes in any capacity. You don't have to go near a snake. It's not a vital requirement that you are going to have a snake put in your hand. When you have emetophobia, you are scared of your own body. You cannot escape that fear. That fear is with you constantly. When you have fears, there is a moment where you can escape and go to a safe space. With emetophobia, you're almost never safe. But the best thing for emetophobia is exposure therapy. And it's hell. I won't lie. It's horrible.
Yeah.
Because when that's the thing that you are most deathly afraid of, like absolute worst fear, can't handle it, and then your therapist is going, right, I need you to read this story about someone being sick in great detail, and then I need you to watch cartoons of people being sick, and then I need you to look at pictures of people being sick, and then they need you to watch videos of people being sick, and you're like, are you joking? Like, are you actually unwell? Like, no, I'm not doing it. But when you do it in these like steps, so you start off just saying the words vomit, sick, it's fine, like nothing's going to happen. You learn that that's okay, and then you move on and you move on. So now it's still very much a fear for me. Like, my thing is being sick in public, which is why I find it so hard to leave the house. And I I don't know if you are kind of the same, because you were talking about like philosophy and like being a deep person, being sensitive, but I individualize myself a lot. And I think that I'm the only person that this could happen to. And I think no one is having shared experiences. Like, I always, when I'm like in a hole of emetophobia and I'm like terrified and I'm out, I always think, why do I think that I'm the person that's going to be sick? Like, anyone could. Any one person in this room could be the one that is sick. No one could be sick. No one could care. But I'm always like, it's me. It's going to be me. And I'm really going to embarrass myself, and everyone's going to reject me, and I'm never going to be able to speak to someone again, because they're all going to be like, that's the girl that threw up. And I'm going to die alone. And it's like, you just have to kind of like work up in steps of being like, it's okay. You're fine. You just have to kind of live with your body.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, I had no idea that was the kind of the catalyst for so much. I didn't even realize that was why the social kind of, or like the outside the house element was there as well. That's tough. That's serious. I mean, it prompts a few thoughts for my own experience, because I've not had such like I have had some very specific forms of anxiety. I mean, I live in central London, but that'll actually shock a few people, because about 4 or 5 years ago, I used to not be able to like go to any cities. Airports used to overwhelm me. I had very severe anxiety, and I managed to kind of treat myself, because using exposure and response therapy that I learned from Viktor Frankl, I've become very interested in logotherapy, which is basically his approach to trying to basically create an environment where people have to deal with their hardship. Do you know much about Viktor Frankl?
I don't know.
So he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he survived Auschwitz. He was a
Oh, wow.
psychotherapist, Austrian, and he survived Auschwitz, and he wrote a book about the experience. And the book was mainly catered towards the response of others. And because he was technically a doctor, he was treated a little bit better, but still, horrendous. But he watched people kill themselves, not kill themselves, the ones that endured, and he was fascinated by the ones that could endure it and the ones that couldn't. And he then used that to create something called logotherapy. And being the psychiatrist he was, he also, or psychotherapist, he would use ERT, which is exposure and response therapy. So the same thing, like if you're scared of a tarantula, the concept is that you build small steps until you have one in your hand. So everything you're saying. And that captivated me, because despite having had CBT, I found it highly ineffective. I found it very lazy. I found it, I within 10 minutes had found online all the steps to CBT and had done them myself. So when I then had two therapists talking me through it, I was like, come on, like you're just following a list. It doesn't work for me. I have such a niche response. I understood my brain, understood my body. I didn't understand how to surpass that. So I similar to you, had to like build myself up. But yeah, that was a really interesting experience to have such a specific form of anxiety. And sometimes I lose track of how far I've come with that. But I think mine was always a bit more manageable, in the sense that I knew it was something I could get over. And mine was actually more affected by a person. I'd become very, there were some things that had happened growing up, and then other things in my life. And basically I'd lost like all my trust for strangers. I just didn't trust people. I thought something was going to happen to the people I loved. And I remember like when me and Sophie used to go to like London, I would worry that something was going to happen to her, and that I would be there and not be able to control it. So like the interesting thing was, if I was to have gone to the city on my own, or if she was to have gone on her own, I would be absolutely fine. But when we're together, that's when it would affect me. So I had to involve her in my process, and she was amazing. She helped me, despite it being her fault. No, joking. She really helped me through that, which was huge.
That's so, I never knew that at all, that you had gone through that. Although, no, I think you had mentioned to me, not in that much detail, that like we had kind of had that same kind of like social fear. But it
Mm,
sounds like you kind of had also elements of like OCD in that, because a lot of that is fear of bad things happening to
yeah.
people, which I'm the same. It's like, um I have this thing called magical thinking, where I think that the things I do and the things I think have a real consequence in real
Mm,
life. So there are, and a lot of people with OCD will relate to this. Like, you have your routines, and they might look completely stupid to other people. Like, I, I I'm just like weighing up whether I want to be vulnerable about this. But basically, when I'm getting ready to go out, I take my shoes off the shoe rack and I hit them against the light switch every
Okay.
time I go out,
Yeah.
because that is my like safety. Somehow I must have done it one time and my brain was like, oh, you had a good day because you did that, so now every time I go out I have to do it. But there are like these elements of like safety and like your behaviors. If you don't do something, that something bad's going to happen, or if you do something, that something good's going to happen. So that's so interesting that yours was kind of
Mm.
like, that kind of obsessive anxiety about danger. And that's so relatable, I think, for a lot of people. A lot of people go through that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't think most people know. I don't even think some of my family know. I'm not, despite the fact that I literally made a social media account where people open up about their experiences, there's actually a lot I haven't opened up about. Partly because I do think there is sometimes an underlying level of embarrassment, like that I couldn't get past the fact that I'm like in my early 20s, I should be enjoying my life. And the thought, like one of the big things was that I couldn't eat. So I could go and I'd be fine, but I couldn't eat. I would be so anxious. So we would go to these beautiful places. I would like ruin dinners. And I was thinking, why would this girl want to be with this anxious kid that's like, every time she's going out, we're doing stuff. Why would she want to be with me when she could be with someone else and then you start to hate yourself. And you think, why me? I definitely had like a phase of a lot of self-pity, which was very valuable for me now, given how I feel about the subject, and how destructive I think it can be. But yeah, there was a lot of negativity around that period of my life, and that is very chicken and the egg with kind of like feeling more depressed and anxious. Like it made me generally more depression anxious, but I think maybe being in that state also made those experiences a lot worse. But yeah, I had to do like very gradual exposure, and I also have some little things that I do, and not as much now, but when I was in the peak of it, yeah, like very small little, almost like meditative mantras. If I was ever traveling anywhere, I would always meditate. So like if I was on a train to London, I would have to do like a 20-minute eyes shut meditation, like no question. And I always, because I'm such like a physical response anxiety person, my big thing's like learning to like release my stomach. And I
Okay.
imagine there's this like ball of chaos in my stomach, and I am like, like when you have like a knot and you're trying to find that little bit and you've got it. That's what I would like envision. I'd shut my eyes and I would envision like searching my stomach, almost like my intestine. It's a bit of a thought for some people, and trying to find that release point, and literally trying to let go of that tension, like breathing. And I definitely have always been a very negative person about myself. I'm very, very hard on myself. I wish I wasn't, but doing things like looking at the mirror before I would go out and just saying like I love you to myself, trying to tell myself that like it's okay, like this isn't forever. Again, it's not something I do as much now. Just in a rush all the time now, I forget to say I love you to myself. But it's something I did for a long time, and it's amazing how like that was one of the better therapists was like, why do you hate yourself? I remember in the first session, this is like one of the most profound moments of my entire life. In the first session with this guy, it was the first time I'd ever had a male therapist as well. He was like, tell me everything. Just tell me everything. Let's see where you're at. And I spoke nonstop for like 20 minutes or 15 minutes. And I finished. He sat there for like 30 seconds. And I was like, obviously at this point, I was like a ball of fire. And he said,
Sweating.
drenched. And the camera's like that. And he said, in the 20 minutes that we've spoke, he was like, you put yourself down or you talk negatively about yourself 24 times. He was like, that's a lot. And I don't know why, I just crumbled. I just like burst into tears because I already was like on edge. And that was like the pinnacle moment. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? But I would like, in the mirror say to myself, like, I love you. And I would just like start crying sometimes. And that's a really lovely thing in hindsight. But at the time it was not nice.
No.
But yeah, it's so funny how you create these little, I mean, yours are a little bit funkier, which I kind of love. It's kind of like a bit edgy and cool. We should put that on a t-shirt, just like a little cartoon of you smacking your shoes. Like we all make our own little thing. Mine's just me in a mirror. with a speech bubble and a tear.
That's
But
that's so interesting though, because exactly the same. I'm finding that we are very similar in one, that we are both too logical for our own good. So therapy sometimes doesn't work when you're too logical, because I know I know what my anxiety is. I know why I'm anxious. I know what triggers it. I know that none of it is real in an outside sense. I feel it very real, but it's not. The dangers aren't real, but I can't mesh those two. I'm too logical to mesh them. And two, that self-doubt and like hating yourself. And I've so many therapists have made me like write lists of all the things that I like about myself and like what I think my friends might like about me. And then, having to ask my friends like, can you like pick out of this list like what you think like my greatest traits are? like so that I have like a reference of like, hey, you're not like an awful person that is gonna like do something awful and be rejected. So yeah, that's so interesting. But have you ever heard about the superhero pose? It's similar
go
to
on.
that, like it's saying I love you in the mirror. Is that a lot of surgeons do it actually before they perform surgery. Is if you stand with your hands on your hips, like really strong, like feet planted, like a superhero. It's meant to like mimic that like kind of confidence that then a lot of people do it before they like start their day. So I've tried that a couple of times.
Yeah, see, I've realised that one of my superpowers. I haven't done that, by the way. Sorry, I'm very uncomfortable. One of the things that I do now is I just like will initiate everything with something verbal. So if I say I was going on like a date or say I was in an interview, I've realised I can talk quite well. I've built up a very robust vocabulary. Um, so I will always start something with like a little joke. I will always do something to like break the ice, but in a way that's, appropriate. And I feel like that's that little way of just like being like you're human. It's almost like I'm trying to be a little bit silly to not stay so serious, because if I become too serious, then it just like everything bleeds into me. So I guess less of like a superpower, more power, more of a clown. But no, I just think it diffuses like the tension inside me a little bit. Um, because yeah, there's still like a lot of anxiety in me all the time. I'm just so used to it now. Like I always say to people, like it's not that I'm that much happier than I ever have been. It's just that I'm so much better at being sad, and I think I'm just so much more in tune with both sides of the coin. Hence the Happy Sad Club. Um, there is something I wanted to ask you though, because it's something I'm very, very interested in, and it goes back to emetophobia and those experiences that you talked about. And it's like people's perceptions of you versus your perceived perceptions of their perceptions of you. Um, I'm really interested in this idea, and me and Joe talk about it actually. And it's the idea that like we assume we know like outcomes, and we assume we know what other people think of us, but there's such a heavy bias against us when we assume that. And I always think like in my examples, I just felt like a fool to be anxious, and I felt silly, and I didn't talk about these experiences because I also didn't think that other people were going through what I was going through. I thought there's no way people are going through what I'm going through because it's so awful. They surely would say something, and yet here I am, the hypocrite. Um, and I think when I think about what you said with your emetophobia, like being the one to be sick and what people would think, the truth is, if one of your friends wasn't well or something happened and they were sick, you would be, despite your distance from them in the time, super compassionate, super accepting of it. You would never, nothing in your mind would ever think negatively of that, past the fact that you know that it's not something you like. And it's the same with me. Like when people tell me that they're anxious or depressed, other guys, I would be there straight away. And yet I would never assume that they would ever be there for me. And I think that's so strange. But I can't, even now, like I've a lot better, but I still can't let go of that completely. And like that is one of the kind of the phenomenons that really I can't get past, is this dissociation between my thoughts and reality. I just don't know
I'm
what you think about
also,
that.
yeah, funnily enough, not someone that's easily grossed out either. Like, if you were to tell me just the most disgusting thing that you had all the bodily functions on a train platform, I'd be like, oh, that sucks. Like, Are you all right? Do you feel better now? Like, I'm not easily grossed out, but for some reason, if it was me, you know, burn her at the stake. She's a gross, disgusting troll. But yeah, it's very much. I actually, with one of my therapists, did an experiment, which you will find you do a lot in therapy if you're trying to do exposure therapy. A lot of experiments, where she had me write down all the things that I thought people noticed about me in public. So I must have been probably about 20 maybe. So a lot of it was like, people can tell I'm anxious, people are looking at my acne, people think that I'm saying things wrong, or that like I'm stumbling over my words, or I'm not very good at speaking, or all of these things that kind of you would judge someone for. And then she had one of her colleagues come in and she filmed us having a conversation. And then she took her colleague out of the room and gave her this sheet of paper of questions of like, what did you notice about Ella and things like that. And it was things like, oh, I noticed that her hair looked nice and she had a nice jumper on and she could carry a conversation pretty well. And, absolutely nothing that I was worried about, this person ever thought. And it is so that like the things you think about yourself, you are always projecting on other people. Like the way you said about like when you were with your partner and why would she want to be with someone like that? That's you projecting onto someone. And the chances are there's like a 99% chance that they don't feel that way at all. And I don't know how you marry those two, kind of the public perception and your own perception, and like kind of override that negativity about yourself. And yeah, same thing, like the embarrassment of telling people that you're struggling. For a long time I wasn't even being honest with counselors. I was kind of skirting around it and just, oh, I don't know why I'm anxious. In my head I know exactly why, but I was so embarrassed because I was like, no one else thinks like this, no one else feels like this. And then as soon as I told one therapist how I was feeling, they were like, oh, that's like the most common thing that adults go through. It's like a really common fear. And I was like, oh, imagine if I had told 5 therapists ago. Imagine if I'd been honest then. I probably would have been in a in a better place. But it's hard to get past that. Everyone wants to be liked. I think if people say, I don't care what people think, I question it a bit, because surely you care a little bit. We all want to be liked. No one wants to be like cast out and rejected. And we're all in that same boat of trying to do things that make us more appealing to other people, and trying to like grapple with how we feel about ourselves and how we think people feel about us. It's a really hard one to dissect.
Yeah, it's so interesting. One of the other things that I find really interesting about my own perception of my experience is that I was very conscious of the attitudes towards young people's mental health by older people, and this idea that everyone's miserable now, everyone's got problems. And I was like, at the time, not opening up at all. And it became impossible for me to let go. It became impossible for me to become honest, to the point where I was conditioned where my first therapist, I lied the whole way through. I remember going to the GP and he was like, so what's up? And I was like, I'm a little bit sad and this, that, crying every day. Just lying. And I think there's such like a social pressure. There was such a social pressure on me to be a certain way because I'm a young, fit man who, I don't mean fit as an attractive, I mean I'm just healthy. Who, who was doing well in education. I was doing this, I was doing that. I should have been expected to be a certain way. Again, perception. But there was, and it is often a lot of comments made about younger people and those experiences. The irony being, I know a hell of a lot of older generations that are going through a lot and just can't let go of their pride. And I think they would feel so much better for just acknowledging those factors in themselves.
It's just
because
undiagnosed.
yeah, it's just that if I don't say it's something, it's nothing. I just go home and be unhappy every day, and that's what life is. And I just refuse to accept that this is what life is. I was very self-assured in the sense that I knew that this isn't what I should be experiencing, nor what I wanted to experience. But I do think it's really difficult, and I don't know. The actual. Go on.
Sorry, Karen.
No, that's okay.
Is that kind of one of the reasons you started the Happy Sad Club, because you were trying to like break away from that kind of not people not wanting to speak about how they were feeling, and also kind of letting people know that it's okay to feel that way, and that everyone else is kind of in the same boat.
So that's exactly where I was going before you rudely interrupted. Okay.
So sorry. I've got to work on it.
No, that was brilliant. No, that was brilliant. That was the perfect question. Yeah, truthfully, that is the exact reason. So I realized that the reason I shared on my personal profile was because I couldn't talk. Soph and so my ex-girlfriend and my mum were the only two people that actually knew. I'd maybe mentioned to my sisters a couple of times that I wasn't feeling good. Me and my dad had like a tiny little chat, but no one knew. Like, if they think they knew, they didn't, unfortunately, which is a bad thing on my part, a very bad thing. But I publicly shared about how bad things were in like a written post. I didn't even talk, and I got an absurdly positive response from it. One that I couldn't believe. I had 50 comments, loads of people I had so many private messages from boys and girls, and I had some people message me that I had always looked at as being very strong, very, put together, and they would say, like, I've just listened to your thing, I've just read your thing, I just want you to know that I can really resonate with a lot of it. I've had a bit of a tough time. I haven't said anything, and I couldn't believe it. Like, I refused to believe it. I remember I turned my phone, I posted it, turned my phone off for like a day and a half. And then when I turned it back on, it was like, oh my God, I was just completely overwhelmed by, the amount. And that was like a very big, like, eureka moment. And then nothing actioned on it. And then I ended up doing a talking post a little while later because I had a really powerful experience where someone had inquired of me about being a client, a guy. And as he was looking through my social media, he found the post. And we'd spoken in the morning, and then he texted me again in the evening. Pardon me. I basically said that having read my post, he decided to open up with his family about his mental health, and he told me that he'd been struggling, he'd been to see a GP, he'd been put on antidepressants, but he'd never told his girlfriend, he'd never told his family. And I was so emotional, like so emotional. And I couldn't believe that me speaking about my experience allowed him to action speaking about his. Like, I couldn't comprehend that because that's not why I did it. I did that out of desperation, out of fear that things would get very bad if I didn't do something. And that was the only logical outcome for me. I realize now that's not like the right approach for everyone, but I realize that's like a very good approach for a lot of people. I suppose what felt selfish has almost become altruistic in the sense that my action has been deemed somewhat selfless by people, which is the right idea because it actually feels very selfish. Like, I did that because I needed to, but the selflessness was that I did something that then led other people. And I think for especially as much as I wish it wasn't the case, I think for a lot of men, that is quite a big experience. And then I just had this moment where I realized that actually there does come a point where you do just have to become uncomfortable with it. Like, you do just have to do something to shock yourself into change. Whether that comes at closing stages of processing experience, like you've obviously very, very in tune with your experience, and that shows itself so much in the way you talk about it. And I think I'm the same. But for a lot of people, sometimes exposing themselves earlier to the fact that this is, consistent between people, you are not alone in that sense. Even if your experience is slightly different, there's distinct similarities. It's the cousins of someone else's experience, I guess. I think that really helps you adjust and attack it in a way that's much healthier. I always say that I feel like we all carry the same, secrets, but we just don't, we don't share them. We don't realize that they are not just our own. We both think we know some private knowledge, but actually we both know it. We just haven't talked about it. And when you pull that little curtain off or you reveal it, you realize quite quickly actually that you very much aren't alone. So I guess that's the driver.
Yeah, even like us having known each other for 20 years, having this chat, we've probably discovered things about each other that we never knew. And that's all it takes, is to sit down with someone and just ask a question and be open and be vulnerable. And you learn so much and you feel like you can relate, which I think is what we're all trying to do. And I think that's what is so good about the Happy Sad Club, is that you're gonna be able to listen to and watch so many different life experiences and be able to pick up on things that you've also been through and not feel so alone and not feel like you have to carry yours, and you can maybe, offload that to someone else, and there's no shame in doing so. I think everyone needs to, like you said, get uncomfortable. Like, it might be awful, and it is. We've both gone
Yeah.
through it, where that, that first instance of having to tell someone I'm struggling, it's uncomfortable, it's horrible, no one ever wants to do it, but the things that come out of it are so positive. Like, I couldn't imagine where I would be now if I hadn't told people I'm not doing well.
Well, yeah, I have a very good idea of where I'd be, which just scares the
Mm.
life out of me. But
Yeah.
was there something that was there like a change in perception, or was there like a catalyst of attitude change? Like, for example, I used to say two words to myself. I used to write them I write every day. I used to write every day, and it was just be curious. Like, be curious. This is such an interesting experience. Be curious about it. Like, why do you feel that way? Is it okay to feel that way? Do you have to be happy all the time? I have become so curious about the therapy, about myself, about the feelings, about how would I feel if I did talk about it? What would happen if and I think almost becoming like a complete experiment majorly like reshaped the way I viewed my experiences. I stopped running away from things and started slowly walking towards them. And I think it was all because I just had found those words, be curious. So it's quite a specific question, but I just wondered if there was anything that, helped you make that transition.
I think the thing that there's kind of like two parts to it, I guess. Like, the thing that made me seek help and want to get better was pure desperation, was
Yeah.
just pure bottom of the barrel. I can't live like this. Like, there's just no way. And I always used to say to myself, similar to you having that same mantra in your head, like, I'm meant for so much more. Like, there's so much more
Cool.
for me. I just know it. Like, I feel it. And I feel it even now. Like, as much as I am better, I just know, like, I'm meant to be doing so many good things. Like, I'm meant to be living a life that is really beautiful and fulfilling. And that's what kind of made me think I just have to, like, throw myself into recovery and actively try and get better. And then the thing that changed my kind of attitude about it to be more positive, I think just uh, gratitude, essentially. Like, a lot of therapists will tell you to keep a journal of all the things you're thankful for, and as you start getting better, you can't believe that you were ever in such a bad place, and the place you're in now feels incredible. Even if you're not where you want to be, you are somewhere, and it feels amazing to, like, make progress. And I think once I started making progress and I was like writing down all these things that I was grateful for, and like, I still do it now every time I get into bed at night and I wrap myself in my duvet. I'm like, I'm so lucky to have a bed. Like, I have pillows and a duvet. I'm in a bed in a house with my parents, and I'm like buzzing off life. I'm like a little, like, you know, I just get a buzz off life. And I think once you realise that there are things to be grateful for, you could be in the absolute worst. You could be in the trenches. But if you're like, hey, I can breathe, and the sky is outside, and sometimes it's sunny, and birds exist, and dogs come and say hi to me sometimes. I think that, like, those tiny little things, they all build up, and then you start becoming like really, you just see life for what it is. And even if you're in like a bad place, life is still incredible, and it feels really, I feel lucky to be here and to be able to experience things and feel. So I think that's kind of what clicked for me, is like just being grateful.
Yeah, I I actually wrote something ages ago on like the power of desperation, and I had a client last night. Actually, he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when he was like in his mid 40s, and he's now in his mid-50s, and in the last 10 years, he has not taken his foot off the accelerator. He's the fittest, healthiest, strongest, happiest he's ever been. But it took like a real point of desperation, a real point of a need to change. And the sad truth is that for a lot of people, it does take that. And I had a point of desperation as well, where I was like, I cannot live like this. And, but to channel that into gratitude, I think is so cool. And similar to you, I've definitely tried to play. I'm not great at it, but I still try and do it. But this is a great example where I feel like influences of things like religion, because I read something ages ago that was from a very kind of bad place, but it was the idea of like gratitude being a privilege, that to say you're proud, to say you're grateful for things when life's easy is very different. But religion proves that theory wrong. And this isn't a podcast about religion, but an example that there's always a way to, I think gratitude is an attitude, hence why attitude is in gratitude. And I think that shift is massive. And I just think it's really nice to hear you say what seem like such simple things, but actually symbolize something so much more. And I don't want people to miss that when you say you're grateful for your pillows, it's not about the pillows. It's about your perception and attitude to things that exist within your world, and the opportunity we have to turn things into positives or negatives. Is there, not always in our control. Sometimes we lose that battle. I think we're both point and case of that, but you're trying, and that's the main thing, is just the fact that there's effort. And I just think it's so nice.
Yeah, I think we're both on that kind of plane of curiosity about life and wanting to live. And I think that sometimes can just be the biggest driving force to getting better, is just wanting to live, be alive and experience things. And even if there's sad points along the way, which we've both experienced in abundance, it's that knowing that there are still things that are great, and there are people that love you, and I just love life. I think life's great. I think
and Ella, life loves you.
I bloody hope so. I'm hoping that will come back to me, and it will give me some gifts in the form of me being able to leave the house a bit more. Like, guys, hi,
just think of the world as your home. Your home isn't four walls. It is the soil. It's the concrete. It's the cafe and nightclub. It's everything.
We always joke, because I was a product of a home birth. I was born in this house that I live in wow. my parents' bedroom, and we always joke that like I was born at home and I never left.
Your soul is tethered.
Too right, yeah. I'm going to haunt this place for the rest of my days.
All right, I want to end this with 2 questions, and I think I want to make this a thing, but this can be the pilot for it. I want to ask you 2 questions, and you can ask me the same ones. I haven't prepared any answers, but the first question is, what's making you happy right now?
Oh, that's such a good question, because there's always so much. What's making me happy right now is that I have 3 crochet projects going on up till Christmas, and that's like my favorite thing to do, is just sit and crochet. So I'm really happy doing that. Also, I'm currently staring at some really beautiful flowers, and they're in my little cowboy boot vase. And every time I come into my room, I'm like, oh, they're like blossoming in my room, and I must have been treating them so nicely. And I don't know, I'm just like enjoying living, like being alive is making me happy.
It's beautiful. And what's making you sad right now?
What's making me sad? Oh, that's such a good question. There are some world things that are making me sad, which I won't go into, because maybe this is not the place for that. But I know we spoke about it in like a kind of a private conversation the other day. But the world is in a dire position right now, and I think that's making me really sad. And then more personally, I think I'm kind of I'm in a plateau with my anxiety at the moment. Like, there have been moments where I've been so much better than I am now, and like I'm struggling to get back to that, but working through it. So I always get kind of sad when I think about where I could be, but I need to just not think about that at all. So I'm cruising right now, and I wish I could like accelerate, but
Yeah.
that will come with time.
Yeah. Beautiful. I think that
Yeah.
I'm quite happy
I
with
want
how
to know
that went.
your answers then. What's making you happy?
Yeah, it's so funny because I always think I have great questions. I'd have terrible answers. I don't really know. I think what's making me happy is that I've got every. Oh god, I feel like I might get emotional. Everything that
Oh,
I've been building towards for a long time, I feel like it's finally happening. Like I feel like my life at the moment is everything I hoped it would be. Um, how successful I am within that is a different conversation. But I've constructed a world where I'm nourishing each part of myself. You know, I'm socially fulfilled. I'm building like creative things that I feel very passionate about, like this and my podcast with Joe. Um, I'm doing my PhD. I'm in a city that I wanted to be in, and yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm very grateful that I was one of the ones that managed to get to that point where things got where I thought they could. Um, so that's making me feel quite happy. I've also I'm going away with all my family in a few weeks, and I miss some of them quite a lot. So that's going to make me happy. And there's going to be 3 dogs there, 3 whole dogs,
nice.
and I'm stuck in a little flat in London with no dogs. Even though my dog's evil. So I would say, and I've got a cardamom bun from my favourite
I
little
was just
cafe.
about to say that. I was going to say, is your bun
It's
making you
whispering
happy?
from behind me. I have to. Thank God I've got headphones on because the whispers are getting louder. But that is literally going to get smashed as soon as this
Honestly,
is done.
I was so jealous.
So I would
And
say,
then, yeah,
yeah.
on the other side, what's making you sad?
Nihilism, existential dread. No,
Mm.
I would say what's making me sad. There's things that will forever be there that make me sad. But one of the things that's a little bit more, I guess, understandable is I had like a few good weeks of sleep, and sleep's been something I always really, really struggle with. And the last like 2 weeks have just been terrible, and it just takes such a toll because I try so hard to sleep well, and sometimes it just, no matter what I do, it feels out of my control. So that's making me pretty sad because I want to sleep well. It's as simple as that. It seems so silly, but when you've been an insomniac since you were a little boy, you do feel sorry for yourself a bit, and you go like, why can I not just figure this out? Why is it so easy for some people to just shut their eyes, and I'm sitting there for hours? So that's a little bit of a sob story for the sad side. What else is making me sad? No, I feel pretty good. I'm kind of just worried that I'm just trying to make sure I stay like in a position of strength and not burn myself out, because I do have a tendency to maybe spread myself a little thin. So I'm always that's like a little bit of an anxiety, but that's just juggling the balls of life. So
Yeah,
I feel like
I
I'm
think
getting
that's
good
fair.
at it. But
Yeah.
no,
What are
I
we?
feel good.
Good. I'm really happy to hear that, and I'm happy to hear that you feel like you're coming to a place where things are like making sense and they're, everything's slotting into place. I think that's really, I love to hear that. And,
I'm
when my
grateful.
friends are doing well, it's like, yes, I'm like living in, I'm in your lives and I'm feeling that. What are we recommending this week?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to recommend, I haven't prepared this is just off the dome, but I want to recommend some art. So I love an artist called David Shrigley. He's British, he's brilliant, he's very accessible, and it's quite colourful, it's very simple, but there's moments where it's so simple and so profound that I just think it's perfect. I've got one of his books here, and I think it doesn't try to be anything more than what it is. And he touches on things like mental health. He has a strong political stance. He's also just silly. Like he'll do a photo of a duck and be like, "This is a duck." And some other messages are really powerful. And I just think it's a great way of feeling a little bit of something and then carrying on scrolling past it. And sometimes you want to look a bit longer. Sometimes I even want to share them. But I just think he's a really cool little artist. And I saw a thing on my feed of him earlier, and I was like, "Oh, I really like that." What about
That's
you?
cool. I don't think we haven't had art recommended yet. So that's cool.
Trying to diversify.
I'm recommending a program called Couples Therapy, which ties in quite great. So me and my mum are watching this. It's on iPlayer. It is basically just a peek into couples therapy sessions with this incredible therapist called Dr. Orna, and she just brings people out of themselves, and you are literally a fly on the wall into these real, reality. It's real, these real couples and their real therapy sessions and their issues, and you also get to see the therapist talking to her supervisor about the couples. And we're just really enjoying it because it also, they're, even though they're couples, there's this very real theme of like childhood trauma and personal struggle, and how that bleeds into your relationships. And it always kind of causes me and my mum to have conversations between us about things that they're speaking about. And it's just very interested. If you're interested in psychology and you like kind of hearing what those sorts of things, then I highly recommend Couples Therapy on iPlayer.
That sounds heavy.
It
sounds great. I think I'd love it. I'd absolutely love it.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love that pausing it and being like, how are we like that? It takes me so long to read some books because I'm just, I don't know, I'm just processing like, what would I do? But I like it. I think that's a very valuable tool. But no, that's cool. I think that was some good recommendations. Thank you for remembering to recommend, because I would have completely forgotten. But yeah, listen, I think that was a pretty good chat. I really enjoyed being able to just take my time and hear more about, the wisdoms you've accrued from your own experiences. And I think as I've said to you before, like considering, you've still got stuff going on, I think you manage it so well, and you're such a good advocate for how, life doesn't cease to be lived despite adversity. And I think it's really refreshing, because I know a lot of people, yourself included at times, can become like paralyzed by their experiences. And I just think it's a lot more admirable to be able to live that way than you maybe realize, despite your positive attitudes. Like, it is really tough to do that. So I think it's brilliant. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed kind of relating to you in a way that I didn't think maybe we could previously if we hadn't had this chat. And I've learned things about you that I never would have known. And I think what you're doing is really brave. I know people throw that word around a lot, and some people don't take it seriously, but I do think it's brave for you to kind of open yourself up for the greater good and for the greater good so that other people can do the same. And I just think the Happy Sad Club is what a lot of people need right now, and that's proven by how many people get in touch with us and speak about how they're feeling and how many people want to get involved. And I think that's all because of you and what you've managed to do and how you've managed to overcome your own problems and then be vulnerable about your problems enough that people trust you and feel that they can come to you and share. So I think we're both smashing it.
No, it means a lot to you say that. But no, I think we are. I think we're trying our best, and that's all we could ever ask of ourselves or anyone else. Despite the fact that I'm pretty rubbish at getting stuff done at the Happy Sad Club. I think it symbolises what the club is. It's just a chaotic thing. But no, it's good. I think I'm really excited to see what we can do with it. I think there's just so much room for us to just express, and if people want to share, then obviously that's literally the whole point. So despite how big or small that action is, if you are listening and you want to be involved, just throw something at us, because why not? Yeah,
we're very nice, promise.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's wrap it out there. Thank you so much for your time. And if you have listened, thank you so much for listening. And have a good rest of the day.
See ya.